Hi, I'm Hannah.
And I'm Matt Hannah.
We're Horror Hour with the Hannahs, a married couple who love digging into the guts of horror movies.
Literally and figuratively.
Whether it's new releases or cult classics, on our podcast we break down the scares, themes, and hidden messages with just the right amount of love and humor, with some occasional bickering.
So grab your popcorn and your emotional support blanket and join us Wednesdays
for a spooky good time with Horror Hour with the Hannahs.
Available wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe today, if you dare.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now, you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note: sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. Let's start with a confession. I've always wanted to write a horror story, and I have a few story ideas stuck inside my head that need to make their way onto paper. Over the past few weeks, in anticipation of getting started with writing these stories, I've read dozens of short stories, a few books, and a lot of creepypastas. And having come across more than a handful of these terrific short stories, I wanted to share some of the best with you. And here's a bonus. This episode will kick off a week of creepypastas, where I read 6 total stories written to scare the hell out of you. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore 2 genuinely scary creepypastas: Hanging Man Hill and Jeff the Killer. These stories are guaranteed to keep you up at night. Do you have the courage to listen to each of these with the lights off? I'll share the stories. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. Our first story is Hanging Man Hill, written by IndefiniteSilence. Gaston, South Carolina, is a lonely little place. Sitting just south of Columbia along 321, it's only a small crumb off the misshapen piece of pie on the United States plate that we call South Carolina. Its population has almost never gone over 2,000. And it's only 3.4 square miles across in all directions. It feels even lonelier when you come in from a place like Roanoke, Virginia. After Mom lost her job, we moved to the only place where the rest of our family resided, good old South Kakalaki. I had been moping the whole time on the way down, the way I saw it. The only friends I was going to be making here were fire ants and that inferno of a sun. Once we got settled in at 304 Dixiana Drive, I always remembered the address because the number in it was carved into the driveway, and it spelled Ho if you looked at it upside down. I immediately set out into the neighborhood in search of friends. I didn't know how to ride a bike at the time, and I barely knew how to ride a skateboard. So I petered down a long stretch of road, directly across from the front of the house, on my cheap little Walmart board, until I came to a small cul-de-sac that seemed to go uphill. Sitting outside on his front porch was a chubby kid with glasses that looked about 10 or 11, about my age at the time. I really had no one else to talk to, so I asked what his name was. Terry, he told me. He liked being outside a lot, and I didn't, but we both seemed to enjoy video games. With that, we would get along just fine. There was one thing that he hadn't told me over the next few weeks that we spent riding around the neighborhood. He was into scary movies. I was a massive chicken when it came to anything that seemed intent on forcing you to change your underwear every 5 minutes, so I didn't really like that aspect of him. Even worse, he had tons of horror movie action figures and loads of VHS tapes of all the classic creepy movies you can think of, stacked in his room. Every time I came to visit, he was almost certain to scare the living bejesus out of me with one of those creepy Freddy Krueger dolls, or force me to watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with him in the dark. His room wasn't really that nice looking to begin with. He had a bunk bed. He was an only child, and just his grandmother lived with him, in which he slept on the bottom, and all his slasher flicks and action figures slept on top. There were loads of holes in the walls, and everything had a generally grimy feel to it. It made those horrifying moments of watching pure terror in the dark all the more icky. One day, when he realized that I pretty much hated any kind of horror movies he threw at me, he began telling me urban legends. Some of them were about the town as a whole, but more often than not, they were about our particular neighborhood. I didn't really believe any of them. That is, until he told me about Hanging Man Hill. It was about a year after we had met each other. We were riding around the neighborhood. By this time, Terry had told me to man up, and eventually taught me how to ride a bike. He stopped when we were riding in front of a house he had simply entitled The Crack Shack, due to its residents being stoned out of their minds on a regular basis. He seemed to be peering out at a small pathway behind the place that sloped up the farther you went back. He was usually the leader when it came to showing me new places in the neighborhood, so I didn't question a thing when he beckoned for me to follow him up the trail. It was a pretty steep climb up the side of the hill, with plenty of sand and rocks to send anyone not being careful straight back down. It felt as though the trees were closing tighter and tighter on us until we reached a large opening at the top. Besides the empty soda bottles and used condoms, the only man-made thing in the area that I could see were long stretches of telephone poles going across a series of sandy, dry hills. If not for the 2 strips of heavy forest on either side of these hills, it might have gone on forever. The area didn't seem to have any particular importance. I had expected him to bring me to some awful cemetery, but in the dying light of the late afternoon sky, those rolling hills looked beautiful. I thought that he might try some desperate last attempt to scare me, but instead, he just turned to me with the most serious and grim face I'd ever seen on him. "Here we are, Hanging Man Hill," he whispered. "Hanging Man Hill, is this another one of your stories?" "Sort of. Except this one's true." I rolled my eyes at the thought. How did he possibly expect me to believe any of his tales? He just kept staring at me with that face, waiting for me to respond. How could this even be a Hanging Man Hill? There's no Hanging Man, and there's at least 6 hills here. Right down there. Look. He pointed his finger towards the nearest telephone pole, sitting between the 2 closest hills to us. A small creek, no more than 5 feet across, ran between the 2 hills and went onward into that never-ending forest. There was no Hanging Man, but the pole itself seemed more ominous than the rest. "Roy Terrence," he whispered. "Who?" It wouldn't be Hanging Man Hill without a hanging man, would it? He bolted down the first hill on that blazing orange bike of his. I tried to keep up, but Walmart and sporting goods don't seem to mix. There was a faulty chain on my cheap, dull red bike. The sticks from the surrounding trees had rooted themselves to the ground and were now snagging into the dangling chain. With one mighty tug of a huge root on the bike, I was head over handlebars all the way to the bottom. I landed on my knees with a small splush sound as my legs hit the water. It couldn't have been more than a few inches deep. I almost called for help from Terry when I realized that he had stopped at the bottom just before I had tumbled to the creek alongside him. His head was peering upwards, looking straight at the top of that dark and shadowy-looking telephone pole. "Little help?" I squeaked. Terry broke his gaze with the pole just long enough to wrench me from the creek and get me to my feet. After that, his stare continued to be fixed on seemingly nothing at the top of the pole for the longest time. "What is it? Or who is it that you're looking for again?" I grumbled in frustration. I was going to be pretty pissed if he'd taken me down here, and all I had gotten out of the trip was a banged-up knee. I hadn't noticed the pain before, because the water in the stream was cool, but now it stung like the dickens. Roy Terrence, owner of that small shed just beyond the trees over there. I hadn't noticed the shed before. It sat just behind a large oak. It couldn't have been bigger than 5 outhouses put together. After his wife and kid left him, he hung himself on the wires just above us. Cops didn't find much, just a charred husk of what used to be a man. Legend says that whoever is out here at his exact time of death gets strung up on the wires with him. Oh, and do tell, when would that be? For once, he broke his serious tone to give me a goofy, I don't know, shrug. And then he was back to that grim attitude. "And you're suggesting that we stay here and wait for him? Despite the many excuses I have to dispute this, I think I'm going to go with, it's late and Mom is making dinner, so I have to go home." "Fine. Tell your mom that you're sleeping over at my house tomorrow night, and I'll do vice versa with my grandma. Meet me here at 7. Against my better judgment, I decided that I might as well come. What harm could it do? Obviously he was lying, and if nothing else, it would set my mind at ease to see that he was. While none of his stories actually seemed to be true up until this point, his sudden change of tone had made this one sound slightly more believable. When Terry had told his other stories, he was giggling so hard that one might think he'd snorted at least a pound of happy crack. When we were heading home, just as the last tint of orange had left the sky, I asked him, "Why did you get so serious back there? You're always such a total goofball." "I lost my grandpa to Roy Terrence. My grandma was with him when it happened. Haven't you ever wondered why she's so grumpy all the time?" His grandmother was, in fact, very crotchety. I had never bothered to ask why she was that way. If this was all some elaborate hoax by Terry, I was going to slap him into next Thursday when this was done. That night, I had a horrible nightmare. Like most people, I couldn't remember much about it, but it had Roy Terrence written all over it. Even though it was roasting on that hot South Carolina night, I had woken up with the chills. By the time 6 p.m. had rolled around, I had already packed my old school backpack with basic equipment like a flashlight and a few bags of Chex Mix in case we got hungry. By 6:30, I had rolled out into the neighborhood as fast as an overweight 11-year-old could. I had to admit, I was actually pretty excited. Finally, at around 6:55, I arrived at the small creek, where Terry had already set up a small fire and was roasting marshmallows. If I hadn't decided to show up, I would have disappointed him like hell. How is this going to work out exactly? Are we just going to camp out here all night? We don't know when he's supposed to show up, I said. Terry had stuffed his face with a marshmallow. What? He crammed the marshmallow down his throat. I said, I'll wait here all night if I have to. Whatever, I retorted as I plopped down next to his fire. He had thrown 3 lighters in it to keep it lit, and began to pull out my snacks. After about 3 hours, the first of the crickets began to sing their endless chirping song, as the last streak of sun had reached its end. I had begun to grow irritated and a little bit tired. Terry was wide awake, his hand glued to the bag of marshmallows. He had started his eternal gaze at the top of the pole again. Terry, man, I'm tired. If I don't see a crispy dead dude in the next hour, I'm out. Okay. His cheek stuck out like a squirrel's with another marshmallow. I snuggled up to the fire and began to doze off. Just as I was about to slip into unconsciousness, a loud, crusty, brittle peeling sound echoed through the hills and out into the forest. I immediately sat up. My vision was pretty blurred from having almost dozed off, but I could make out Terry's shape. He was gaping, wide-eyed, at the top of the pole. If there had been a bit of moonlight, I might have seen what I was sure to have seen up there, but the crescent moon sat just beyond the trees, like the shed. In an instant, Terry was on his bike and flying up the hill, bag of marshmallows in hand. I managed to pull myself up and get to my bike. I began pedaling like a madman before I realized that my chain had popped off. Stupid damn bike. With my eyes adjusting to the dark, I peered back at the top of the pole one more time before I bolted to the top of the hill. Roy Terrence was not so much a person as he was a sagging shape. His flesh, dark as the night, was clinging to his bones for dear life. His facial features, though not entirely evident, seemed to be in a constant state of both agony and ecstatic joy. And that eye, that one eye he had left, deep in its socket, gazed upon me with absolute hatred and insatiable want. Just when it seemed that he was ready to climb off the wire and come for me, the weak spine that had been holding his head to that molten pile of flesh and bones snapped, sending what was left of his skull tumbling into the fire Terry had started. It gave me one glowing, burning, satisfied grin before disintegrating into a wisp of ash. I had been halfway up the hill before I realized I was moving. I followed the bike tracks Terry had left, which led further into the hills instead of off to the side, where the trail led back to the neighborhood. Just as I clawed my way to the top of the hill, I saw a thin shape dangling from above. "Oh no," I croaked. Terry's bike, that blazing orange bike that he loved so much, was left wrecked at the base of a telephone pole. Above, Terry's body hung limply, though it didn't look much like Terry anymore. Terry hadn't been on the wires as long as Roy, which made it even worse. He was charred, but not entirely. His eyes bulged from his head in constant shock. What was left of his hair stood out on end, still smoking. The seemingly endless wires above entangled Terry's neck like a boa constrictor. Dangling from his scrawny, burnt little arm was a bag of marshmallows, melted to his hand from the heat. The police investigation hadn't dug up much. They had scoured all throughout the area and had not found any evidence that anyone was ever there. I begged them to search the telephone wires, but they continued to state that there was no evidence that anybody had even touched the wires. The search continued for 3 weeks. After police had finally given up, Terry's grandmother passed away. For those last few days, she hadn't said anything to anyone at all. She only sat and stared at the picture of her and her husband for the remainder of her life. After the house had been cleared out, the contents of Terry's room were offered to me. His entire collection of horror movies, action figures, and all else was donated to Goodwill, my request. I went back a few years later. We had gone to Gaston to visit with our family for a while, and I had requested that we stop by the neighborhood. Any evidence that we had ever been there those few fateful years ago had been swept away by police or the weather. Now, like before, there was only useless garbage and telephone poles. Just as I was getting ready to walk away, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. I only saw a tiny bit of it before it fluttered away. It was a melted marshmallow bag. Our next creepypasta is Jeff the Killer, written by Sesseur. Excerpt from a local newspaper. Ominous unknown killer is still at large. After weeks of unexplained murders, the ominous unknown killer is still on the rise. After little evidence has been found, a young boy states that he survived one of the killer's attacks and bravely tells his story. I had a bad dream, and I woke up in the middle of the night, says the boy. I saw that for some reason the window was open, even though I remember it being closed before I went to bed. I got up and shut it once more. Afterwards, I simply crawled under my covers and tried to get back to sleep. That's when I had a strange feeling, like someone was watching me. I looked up and nearly jumped out of my bed. There, in the little ray of light illuminating from between my curtains, were a pair of 2 eyes. These weren't regular eyes. They were dark, ominous eyes. They were bordered in black, and just plain out terrified me. That's when I saw his mouth, a long, horrendous smile that made every hair on my body stand up. The figure stood there watching me. Finally, after what seemed like forever, he said it. A simple phrase, but said in a way only a madman could speak. He said, "Go to sleep." I let out a scream. That's what sent him at me. He pulled up a knife, aiming at my heart. He jumped on top of my bed. I fought him back. I kicked, I punched, I rolled around, trying to knock him off me. That's when my dad busted in. The man threw the knife. It went into my dad's shoulder. The man probably would have finished him off if one of the neighbors hadn't alerted the police. They drove into the parking lot and ran towards the door. The man turned and ran down the hallway. I heard a smash like glass breaking. As I came out of my room, I saw the window that was pointing towards the back of my house was broken. I looked out it to see him vanish into the distance. I can tell you one thing. I will never forget that face. Those cold, evil eyes and that psychotic smile. They will never leave my head. Police are still on the lookout for this man. If you see anyone that fits this description in this story, please contact your local police department. Jeff and his family had just moved into a new neighborhood. His dad had gotten a promotion at work, and they thought it would be best to live in one of those fancy neighborhoods. Jeff and his brother Lou couldn't complain though. A new, better house. What was not to love? As they were getting unpacked, one of their neighbors came by. "Hello," she said. "I'm Barbara. I live across the street from you. Well, I just wanted to introduce myself and to introduce my son." She turns around and calls her son over. "Billy, these are our new neighbors." Billy said hi and ran back to play in his yard. "Well," said Jeff's mom, "I'm Margaret, and this is my husband Peter, and my two sons, Jeff and Lou." They each introduced themselves, and then Barbara invited them to her son's birthday. Jeff and his brother were about to object when their mother said that they would love to. When Jeff and his family are done packing, Jeff went up to his mom. "Mom, why would you invite us to some kid's party? If you haven't noticed, I'm not some dumb kid." "Jeff," said his mother, "we just moved here. We should show that we want to spend time with our neighbors. Now we're going to that party, and that's final." Jeff started to talk, but stopped himself, knowing that he couldn't do anything. Whenever his mom said something, it was final. He walked up to his room and plopped down on his bed. He sat there looking at his ceiling when suddenly he got a weird feeling. Not so much a pain, but a weird feeling. He dismissed it as just some random feeling. He heard his mother call him down to get his stuff, and he walked down to get it. The next day, Jeff walked downstairs to get breakfast and get ready for school. As he sat there, eating his breakfast, he once again got that feeling. This time it was stronger. It gave him a slight tugging pain, and he once again dismissed it. As he and Lou finished breakfast, they walked down to the bus stop. They sat there waiting for the bus, and then all of a sudden, some kid on a skateboard jumped over them, only inches above their laps. They both jumped back in surprise. "Hey, what the hell?" The kid landed and turned back to them. He kicked his skateboard up and caught it with his hands. The kid seems to be about 12, 1 year younger than Jeff. He wears an Arrow shirt and ripped blue jeans. Well, well, well. It looks like we got some new meat. Suddenly, 2 other kids appeared. One was super skinny and the other was huge. "Well, since you're here, I'd like to introduce ourselves. Over there is Keith." Jeff and Lou looked over to the skinny kid. He had a dopey face that you would expect a sidekick to have. And he's Troy. They looked over at the fat kid. Talk about a tub of lard. This kid looked like he hadn't exercised since he was crawling. "And I," said the first kid, "am Randy. Now for all the kids in this neighborhood, there is a small price for bus fare, if you catch my drift." Lou stood up, ready to punch the lights out of the kid's eyes, when one of his friends pulled a knife on him. "I had hoped you would be more cooperative, but it seems we must do this the hard way." The kid walked up to Lou and took his wallet out of his pocket. Jeff got that feeling again. Now it was truly strong, a burning sensation. He stood up, but Lou gestured for him to sit down. Jeff ignored him and walked up to the kid. "Listen here, you little punk. Give back my bro's wallet or else." Randy put the wallet in his pocket and pulled out his own knife. "Oh, and what will you do?" Just as he finished the sentence, Jeff popped the kid in the nose. As Randy reached for his face, Jeff grabbed the kid's wrist and broke it. Randy screamed, and Jeff grabbed the knife from his hand. Troy and Keith rushed Jeff, but Jeff was too quick. He threw Randy to the ground. Keith lashed out at him, but Jeff ducked and stabbed him in the arm. Keith dropped his knife and fell to the ground screaming. Troy rushed him too, but Jeff didn't even need the knife. He just punched Troy straight in the stomach, and Troy went down. As he fell, he puked all over. Lou could do nothing but look in amazement at Jeff. "Jeff, how'd you—" That was all he said. They saw the bus coming and knew they'd be blamed for the whole thing, so they started running as fast as they could. As they ran, they looked back and saw the bus driver rushing over to Randy and the others. As Jeff and Lou made it to school, they didn't dare tell what happened. All they did was sit and listen. Lou just thought of that as his brother beating up a few kids. But Jeff knew it was more. It was something scary. As he got that feeling, he felt how powerful it was, the urge to just hurt someone. He didn't like how it sounded, but he couldn't help feeling happy. He felt that strange feeling go away, and stay away for the entire day of school. Even as he walked home due to the whole thing near the bus stop, and how now he probably wouldn't be taking the bus anymore, he felt happy. When he got home, his parents asked him how his day was, and he said in a somewhat ominous voice, it was a wonderful day. Next morning, he heard a knock at his front door. He walked down to find 2 police officers at the door, his mother looking back at him with an angry look. "Jeff, these officers tell me that you attacked 3 kids, that it wasn't regular fighting, and that they were stabbed. Stabbed, son." Jeff's gaze fell to the floor, showing his mother that it was true. "Mom, they were the ones who pulled the knives on me and Lou." "Son," said one of the cops, "we found 3 kids, 2 stabbed, 1 having a bruise on his stomach, and we have witnesses proving that you fled the scene. Now what does that tell us?" Jeff knew it was no use. He could say him and Lou had been attacked, but then there was no proof it was not them who attacked first. They couldn't say that they weren't fleeing, because truth be told, they were. So, Jeff couldn't defend himself or Lou. "Son, call down your brother." Jeff couldn't do it, since it was him who beat up all the kids. "Sir, it was me. I was the one who beat up the kids. Lou tried to hold me back, but he couldn't stop me." The cop looked at his partner, and they both nod. "Well, kid, looks like a year in juvie." "Wait," says Lou. They all looked up to see him holding a knife. The officers pulled their guns and locked them on Lou. "It was me. I beat up those little punks. I have the marks to prove it." He lifted up his sleeves to reveal cuts and bruises, as if he was in a struggle. "Son, just put the knife down," said the officer. Lou held up the knife and dropped it to the ground. He put his hands up and walked over to the cops. "No, Lou, it was me. I did it." Jeff had tears running down his face. "Huh, poor bro. Trying to take the blame for what I did. Well, take me away." The police led Lou out to the patrol car. "Lou, tell them it was me. Tell them. I was the one who beat up those kids." Jeff's mother put her hands on his shoulders. "Jeff, please, you don't have to lie. We know it's Lou. You can stop." Jeff watched helplessly as the cop speeds off with Lou inside. A few minutes later, Jeff's dad pulled into the driveway, seeing Jeff's face and knowing something was wrong. Son, what is it?" Jeff couldn't answer. His vocal cords were strained from crying. Instead, Jeff's mother walked his father inside to break the bad news to him as Jeff wept in the driveway. After an hour or so, Jeff walked back into the house, seeing that his parents were both shocked, sad, and disappointed. He couldn't look at them. He couldn't see how they thought of Lou when it was his fault. He just went to sleep, trying to get the whole thing off his mind. 2 days went by, with no word from Lou at JDC. no friends to hang out with, nothing but sadness and guilt. That is, until Saturday when Jeff is woke up by his mother with a happy, sunshiny face. "Jeff, it's the day," she said as she opened up the curtains and let light flood into his room. "What? What's today?" asked Jeff as he stirs awake. "Why, it's Billy's party." He was now fully awake. "Mom, you're joking, right? You don't expect me to go to some kid's party after..." There was a long pause. "Jeff, we both know what happened. I think this party could be the thing that brightens up the past days. Now, get dressed." Jeff's mother walked out of the room and downstairs to get herself ready. He fought himself to get up. He picked out a random shirt and pair of jeans and walked downstairs. He saw his mother and father all dressed up, his mother in a dress and his father in a suit. He thought, why would they ever wear such fancy clothes to a kid's party? "Son, is that all you're going to wear?" said Jeff's mom. "Better than wearing too much," he said. His mother pushed down the feeling to yell at him and hid it with a smile. "Now, Jeff, we may be overdressed, but this is how you go if you want to make an impression," said his father. Jeff grunted and went back up to his room. "I don't have any fancy clothes," he yelled downstairs. "Just pick out something," called his mother. He looked around in his closet for what he would call fancy. He found a pair of black dress pants he had for special occasions, and an undershirt. He couldn't find a shirt to go with it, though. He looked around, and found only striped and patterned shirts, none of which go with dress pants. Finally, he found a white hoodie and put it on. "You're wearing that?" they both said. His mother looked at her watch. "Oh, no time to change, let's just go," she said as she herded Jeff and his father out the door. They crossed the street over to Barbara and Billy's house. They knocked on the door, and at it appeared Barbara, who, just like his parents, was way overdressed. As they walked inside, all Jeff could see were adults, no kids. "The kids are out in the yard. Jeff, how about you go and meet some of them?" said Barbara. Jeff walked outside to a yard full of kids. They were running around in weird cowboy costumes and shooting each other with plastic guns. He might as well be standing in a Toys R Us. Suddenly, a kid came up to him and handed him a toy gun and hat. "Hey, wanna play?" he said. No, kid. I'm way too old for this stuff." The kid looked at him with that weird puppy dog face. "Please," said the kid. "Fine," said Jeff. He put on the hat and started to pretend shoot at the kids. At first he thought it was totally ridiculous, but then he started to actually have fun. It might not have been super cool, but it was the first time he had done something that took his mind off Lou. So he played with the kids for a while, until he heard a noise. A weird rolling noise. Then it hit him. Randy, Troy, and Keith all jumped over the fence on their skateboards. Jeff dropped the fake gun and ripped off the hat. Randy looked at Jeff with a burning hatred. "Hello. Jeff, is it?" he said. "We have some unfinished business." Jeff saw his bruised nose. "I think we're even. I beat the crap out of you, and you got my brother sent to JDC." Randy got an angry look in his eyes. "Oh no, I don't go for even. I go for winning. You may have kicked our asses that one day, but not today." As he said that, Randy rushed at Jeff. They both fell to the ground. Randy punched Jeff in the nose, and Jeff grabbed him by the ears and headbutted him. Jeff pushed Randy off of him, and both rose to their feet. Kids were screaming, and parents were running out of the house. Troy and Keith both pulled guns out of their pockets. "No one interrupts or guts will fly," they said. Randy pulled a knife on Jeff and stabbed it into his shoulder. Jeff screamed and fell to his knees. Randy started kicking him in the face. After 3 kicks, Jeff grabs his foot and twists it, causing Randy to fall to the ground. Jeff stood up and walked towards the back door. Troy grabbed him. "Need some help?" He picks Jeff up by the back of the collar and throws him through the patio door. As Jeff tries to stand, he is kicked down to the ground. Randy repeatedly starts kicking Jeff until he starts to cough up blood. "Come on, Jeff, fight me." He picks Jeff up and throws him into the kitchen. Randy sees a bottle of vodka on the counter and smashes the glass over Jeff's head. "Fight!" He throws Jeff back into the living room. "Come on, Jeff, look at me." Jeff glances up, his face riddled with blood. "I was the one who got your brother sent to JDC, and now you're just gonna sit there and let him rot in there for a whole year. You should be ashamed." Jeff starts to get up. "Oh, finally, you stand and fight." Jeff is now to his feet, blood and vodka on his face. Once again, he gets that strange feeling, the one in which he hasn't felt for a while. "Finally, he's up," says Randy as he runs at Jeff. That's when it happens. Something inside Jeff snaps. His psyche is destroyed. All rational thinking is gone. All he can do is kill. He grabs Randy and pile drives him to the ground. He gets on top of him and punches him straight in the heart. The punch causes Randy's heart to stop. As Randy gasps for breath, Jeff hammers down on him. Punch after punch, blood gushes from Randy's body until he takes one final breath and dies. Everyone is looking at Jeff now. The parents, the crying kids, even Troy and Keith. Although they easily break from their gaze and point their guns at Jeff, Jeff sees the guns trained on him and runs for the stairs. As he runs, Troy and Keith let out fire on him, each shot missing. Jeff runs up the stairs. He hears Troy and Keith follow up behind. As they let out their final rounds of bullets, Jeff ducks into the bathroom. He grabs the towel rack and rips it off the wall. Troy and Keith race in, knives ready. Troy swings his knife at Jeff, who backs away and bangs the towel rack into Troy's face. Troy goes down hard, and now all that's left is Keith. He is more agile than Troy, though, and ducks when Jeff swings the towel rack. He dropped the knife and grabbed Jeff by the neck. He pushed him into the wall. A thing of bleach fell down on top of him from the top shelf. It burnt both of them, and they both started to scream. Jeff wiped his eyes as best as he could. He pulled back the towel rack and swung it straight into Keith's head. As he lay there, bleeding to death, he let out an ominous smile. "What's so funny?" asked Jeff. Keith pulled out a lighter and switched it on. "What's funny," he said, "is that you're covered in bleach and alcohol." Jeff's eyes widened as Keith threw the lighter at him. As soon as the flame made contact with him, the flames ignited the alcohol in the vodka. While the alcohol burned him, the bleach bleached his skin. Jeff let out a terrible screech as he caught on fire. He tried to roll out the fire, but it was no use. The alcohol had made him a walking inferno. He ran down the hall and fell down the stairs. Everybody started screaming as they saw Jeff, now a man on fire, drop to the ground, nearly dead. The last thing Jeff saw was his mother and the other parents trying to extinguish the flame. That's when he passed out. When Jeff woke, he had a cast wrapped around his face. He couldn't see anything, but he felt a cast on his shoulder and stitches all over his body. He tried to stand up, but he realized that there was some tube in his arm, and when he tried to get up, it fell out, and a nurse rushed in. "I don't think you can get out of bed just yet," she said, as she put him back in his bed and reinserted the tube. Jeff sat there, with no vision, no idea of what his surroundings were. Finally, after hours, he heard his mother. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked. Jeff couldn't answer, though. His face was covered, and he was unable to speak. "Oh, honey, I have great news." After all the witnesses told the police that Randy confessed to trying to attack you, they decided to let Lou go. This made Jeff almost bolt up, stopping halfway, remembering the tube coming out of his arm. He'll be out by tomorrow, and then you two will be able to be together again. Jeff's mother hugged him and said her goodbyes. The next couple of weeks were those where Jeff was visited by his family. Then came the day where his bandages were to be removed. His family were all there to see it, what he would look like. As the doctors unwrapped the bandages from Jeff's face, everyone was on the edge of their seats. They waited until the last bandage holding the cover over his face was almost removed. "Let's hope for the best," said the doctor. He quickly pulls the cloth, letting the rest fall from Jeff's face. Jeff's mother screams at the sight of his face. Lou and Jeff's dad stare awestruck at his face. What happened to my face?" Jeff said. He rushed out of bed and ran to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror and saw the cause of his distress. His face. It's horrible. His lips were burnt to a deep shade of red. His face was turned into a pure white color, and his hair singed from brown to black. He slowly put his hand to his face. It had a sort of leathery feel to it now. He looked back at his family, then back at the mirror. "Jeff," said Lou, "it's not that bad." "Not that bad," said Jeff. "It's perfect." His family were equally surprised. Jeff started laughing uncontrollably, and his parents noticed that his left eye and hand were twitching. Jeff, are you okay?" "Okay. I've never felt more happy. Look at me. This face goes perfectly with me." He couldn't stop laughing. He stroked his face, feeling it, looking at it in the mirror. What caused this? Well, you may recall that when Jeff was fighting Randy, something in his mind, his sanity, snapped. Now he was left as a crazy killing machine. That is, his parents didn't know. "Doctor," said Jeff's mom, "is my son all right, in the head?" "Oh yes, this behavior is typical for patients that have taken very large amounts of painkillers. If his behavior doesn't change in a few weeks, bring him back here, and we'll give him a psychological test." "Oh, thank you, doctor." Jeff's mother went over to Jeff. "Jeff, sweetie, it's time to go." Jeff looks away from the mirror, his face still formed into a crazy smile. "'Kay, Mommy." His mother took him by the shoulder and took him to get his clothes. "This is what came in," said the lady at the desk. Jeff's mom looked down to see the black dress pants and white hoodie her son wore. Now they were clean of blood, and now stitched together. Jeff's mother led him to his room and made him put his clothes on. Then they left, not knowing that this was their final day of life. Later that night, Jeff's mother woke to a sound coming from the bathroom. It sounded as if someone was crying. She slowly walked over to see what it was. When she looked into the bathroom, she saw a horrendous sight. Jeff had taken a knife and carved a smile into his cheeks. "Jeff, what are you doing?" asked his mother. Jeff looked over to his mother. "I couldn't keep smiling, Mommy. It hurt after a while. Now I can smile forever." Jeff's mother noticed his eyes ringed in black. "Jeff, your eyes." His eyes were seemingly never closing. "I couldn't see my face. I got tired and my eyes started to close. I burned out the eyelid so I could forever see myself, my new face." Jeff's mother slowly started to back away. seeing that her son was going insane.
What's wrong, Mommy? Aren't I beautiful?
Yes, son, she said. Yes, you are. Let me go get Daddy so he can see your face. She ran into the room and shook Jeff's dad from his sleep. Honey, get the gun. She stopped as she saw Jeff in the doorway, holding a knife.
Mommy, you lied.
That's the last thing they hear as Jeff rushes them with the knife, gutting both of them. His brother Lou woke up, startled by some noise. He didn't hear anything else, so he just shut his eyes and tried to go back to sleep. As he was on the border of slumber, he got the strangest feeling that someone was watching him. He looked up. Before Jeff's hand covered his mouth, he slowly raised the knife, ready to plunge it into Lou. Lou thrashed here and there, trying to escape Jeff's grip.
Shh,
Jeff said.
just go to sleep.
What did you think of these creepypastas? Leave a comment or email me at redtreehousepod@gmail.com. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with this lingering question. Which of these did you find the scariest? I've shared the stories. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.